Let me start by saying that this is just a theory. I'm just going off the top of my head. It's a theory. In 2008, the year of the banking crisis, the Department of Defense partnered with universities to improve their basic understanding of social, cultural, behavioral, and political forces that shape regions of the world of strategic importance to the U.S. It's also the year Barack Obama was elected. Let's take a look at some of the studies that seem to be a little bit more hair-raising. Strategies of violence, tools of peace, and changes in war termination. Merging competing military forces after civil wars. Strategies of violence, like violent rioting under the guise of peaceful protesting. Who are you expecting to go to a civil war? How about this? The diffusion and influence of counter-radical Muslim discourse. What does that sound like? Oddly like today, doesn't it? How about this? Terrorism, governance, and development. Sounds like you're trying to govern or develop some terrorism. Emotion and intergroup relations. We don't see an outburst of emotion when it comes to making decisions that should be based on facts, do we? Cognitive and social elements of radicalization and de-radicalization. Terrorist alliances? Causes, dynamics, and consequences. Gotta make sure we know how to create them terrorists. Why do they need this information to know how to create these things? They're so vague. Sacred values and social responsibilities in governance and conflict management? Are you really trying to tell me that our government holds our sacred values dearly? No, they don't. Who does not become a terrorist? And why? Shouldn't this be who does become a terrorist and why? Shouldn't you be trying to find out who is becoming terrorists? Not who's not becoming a terrorist. I can tell you why people don't become terrorists. They're normal people. Most of us are. The large majority of us are rational enough to not get violent over a political opinion that we hold. Now read this one. This one is pretty freaking scary. Preventing the next generation. Mapping the pathways of child mobilization into VEOs. That stands for Violent Extremist Organizations. Yes, I know that these could be used for preventative measures. But once you know how to create a radical, what's going to stop you from creating one? Political crisis and language. A computational assessment of social disequilibrium and security threats. Basically, this is saying, what will lead to political crisis? Let's break the numbers down. Let's crunch the numbers. And you know what's really funny is that they use the term disequilibrium instead of just saying what they really mean by that. Division. How can we create political division and social division? How do we get there? Well, let's figure it out. Understanding the origin, characteristics, and implications of mass political movements. When you say mass political movements, do you mean like Black Lives Matter? A terrorist organization basically at this point? You talking about feminists maybe? Because we know feminists have been hijacked, they're out of control. They get invited to the UN to spout nonsense and give numbers that don't exist. Maybe we're talking about the political movement that is the SJWs that are being churned out of today's universities. These people who think that their opinion is worth more than anyone else's opinion. These people who hear an opinion counter to their opinion and lose their fucking shit. These disgusting fools who have had no identity their whole entire life until they finally found a group of people who would give them warm hugs and kisses as long as they were screaming the opinion that they wanted them to scream. Let's continue on. How about this one? New analytics for measuring and countering social influence and persuasion of extremist groups. In other words, let's figure out exactly what makes Black Lives Matter tick. Let's figure out exactly what makes these social justice warriors so extreme, and maybe we could figure out a way to counter them, or we could figure out a way to make them worse. I don't know if you're noticing the common theme here. The social ecology of radicalization, a foundation for the design of common vulnerabilities and exposures, initiatives, and their evaluation. So let's figure out exactly how these social justice warriors work. Let's figure out exactly what makes Black Lives Matter click again. Who's going to influence who? Who's going to become the radical? We should know this. Now, we should know this. I do think we should know this. But when these common themes are backing up like this, it gets a little suspect of what their endgame really is. The social and neurological construction of martyrdom. How do we create people who will blow themselves up? How do we create people who are going to kill themselves for some extreme cause? Don't forget, these are just the ones that won awards. The effect of shocks on overlapping and functionally interacting social and political networks. A multi-method approach. In other words, let's find out what happens when we mix Black Lives Matter members with SJWs, SJWs with feminists. Let's see what happens when they interact. Bad shit happens when they interact. Bad shit. A U.S. Department of Defense research program is funding universities to model the dynamics, risks, and tipping points for large-scale civil unrest across the world, under the supervision of various U.S. military agencies. The multi-million-dollar program is designed to develop immediate and long-term warfighter-relevant insights for senior officials and decision-makers in the defense policy community, and to inform policy implemented by combatant commands. Many independent scholars are critical of what they see as the U.S. government's efforts to militarize social science in the service of war. In May 2008, the American Anthropological Association, the AAA, wrote to the U.S. government, noting that the Pentagon lacks the kind of infrastructure for evaluating anthropological and other social science research in a way that involves rigorous, balanced, and objective peer review, calling for such research to be managed instead by civilian agencies like the National Science Foundation. The following month, the DoD signed a memorandum of understanding with the NSF to cooperate on the management of Minerva. In response, the AAA cautioned that although research proposals would now be evaluated by the NSF's merit review panels, Pentagon officials will have decision-making power in deciding who sits on the panels. There remain concerns within the discipline that research will only be funded when it supports the Pentagon's agenda. Other critics of the program, including the network of concerned anthropologists, have raised concerns that the program would discourage research in other important areas and undermine the role of the university as a place for independent discussion and critique of the military. According to Professor David Price, a cultural anthropologist at St. Martin's University in Washington, D.C., and author of Weaponizing Anthropology, Social Science in Service of the Militarized State. When you looked at the individual bits of many of these projects, they sort of looked like normal social science. Textual analysis, historical research, and so on. But when you added these bits up, they all shared themes of legitibility with all the distortions of oversimplification. Minerva is farming out the piecework of empire in ways that can allow individuals to disassociate their individual contributions from the larger project. He's talking about compartmentalization. Basically tricking people into working on a project they wouldn't normally work on because of their moral values. For example, the atomic bomb. A lot of scientists wouldn't be comfortable building the atomic bomb or working on it because they know it's going to lead to the deaths of millions. So it will get broken down into a bunch of smaller projects, so that way these guys don't realize what they're working on. It doesn't seem as evil to be working on a guidance system in comparison to a bomb that's going to kill millions. Professor Price has previously exposed how the Pentagon's Human Terrain Systems program, designed to embed social scientists in military field operations, routinely conducted training scenarios set in regions within the United States. Now, what other programs do we know that ran within the last year that used the Pentagon's Human Terrain System and also ran within the United States? If you said Jade Helm, you would be correct. Jade Helm, Master the Human Domain. Now, this was two things. This was them adding programs to the human terrain system that the Pentagon uses, and adding new programs to the military's battlefield computer programs, and it was also boots on the ground training for some soldiers in America, which is technically against the law, unless you do it on a military base. They also had soldiers dressing in civilian clothes to blend in with society and be able to spot who the dissidents were.
Now to a Texas-sized conspiracy theory, sparking headlines across the country, including this week in the New York Times. The theory that an upcoming Pentagon training exercise is actually part of a plan to impose martial law. To many, it's far-fetched, but not to some of the top politicians in the Lone Star State.
Now, why would some of these politicians get upset about Jade Helm practicing in their state? Because they decided to label their state as hostile territory. Yes, Texas, Utah, Southern California were all labeled hostile territories during Jade Helm. Now, why does the government feel the need to fester paranoia in our country with these huge ammo buying programs? with the FEMA camps and the FEMA coffins and shit like this. When Barack Obama signed the NDAA, he not only made it possible for indefinite detentions, he also got rid of posse comitatus with that act, which means the military can now be used against the American people. It's been against the law this whole entire time, but now the military can be used against the American people. It can be used against us on our own private land. The government can decide to have the military turn on us if it wants to. But why make it possible? Why create this paranoia that is guaranteed to happen? Why? Why would you do it? Unless there is some endgame to all this. We were told to believe that this was for training overseas. Meanwhile, the actors they got to play the parts of the rioters were screaming things like, "This is against our constitutional rights." And, like I said, they were putting people in civilian clothing to be able to identify who the dissidents are. That's just Jade Helm on the surface, though. Truly what Jade Helm is a computer program. It's an operating system for battlefield planning. The Human Terrain System. What do you think Google's doing? It's making an algorithm for you, human. Now, we are getting a little bit ahead of ourselves right now, but I want to show you this Jade Helm footage. This is some creepy shit, man. Actors or not, this is some creepy shit.
Okay, the lines between the military and the government haven't just been blurred, they've been removed.
The year is 2012. The White House and Barack Obama decide to spend $300 million in public and private financing in order to map the brain and discover exactly how it works and its components. Figure out why certain neurons fire when you have certain thoughts. Now, I wouldn't doubt that this is just an extension of the Department of Defense's award-winning research that they were doing since 2008. It was not announced officially until April 2013. So we have the Department of Defense figuring out exactly what it takes in order to create a violent extremist organization and how to get people involved in those organizations. We also have Barack Obama and the White House figuring out exactly what makes these people tick, just to be sure we know how to create these violent extremist organizations. I mean, come on, it's not like we're having a problem with violent and extreme people and or organizations trying to force people's opinion through violence lately. That hasn't been happening, right? Look at this. This guy supports Trump, so he's attacked by people who aren't even of this country. And people of this country celebrate that. I would suggest that the government has been creating these violent extremist organizations. I would suggest that these people are being manipulated and they don't even realize it. What do you think, I'm paranoid? Well, the government made me this way. Otherwise, why would they continue to do ammunition buys, and FEMA camps, and FEMA coffins, and have things like Jade Helm? Why? I would suggest that these things are going to lead to maybe a civil war, possibly a race war the way things are going lately. And if that happens, Barack Obama has the right to call off the election. Yep, that's right. In a state of civil emergency, the president can call off the election. This guy is about to give America's custodianship of the internet to a foreign entity in less than 6 weeks. Most likely the UN, an organization whose largest voting bloc, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC, it's not very keen on the idea of things like the First Amendment. Now, Jade Helm 2016 is finally starting to kick off, and what are they saying the theme of this year's Jade Helm is going to be? Civil War. What a coinky-dink. So I would suggest that the government is actually creating these organizations, Black Lives Matter and social justice warriors, and affecting the feminists. I mean, they let the feminists come in and talk at the UN. The government is creating these people in order to create division, to create civil disorder. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but just the fact that all the dominoes are in line that it could happen should raise some red flags. And if it doesn't raise your red flag, you are asleep. You are a media baby. You are eating whatever they feed you. Wake up.